Hello friends, welcome back. We continue with our series of videos on whole person healing, and this video is about malariotherapy. You may or may not have heard about it, but by the end of this you will be able to form your own views and perspective on what whole person healing should be looking at. For a moment, try to imagine this treatment protocol. Regardless of whether you are a health professional, a medical professional, or just a layperson, I'll just run you through the steps and let's see what your reaction is. In this protocol, you're dealing with an incurable disease. And what you're told to do is to infect the patient with 10 ml of screened blood from malaria patients. Then you allow 3 weeks, over the course of which that patient develops severe fevers 10 to 12 times over the course of 3 weeks. It is observed that the incurable disease is cured. And now what you're left with is a person with malaria. And that malaria is easily amenable. It can easily be treated with treatment such as quinine. Just reflect upon this and then we'll move on to the next slide. Many of us would actually think that this is plain quackery, straight out of the recipe book of Dr. Quack. But the fact of the matter is, this was recommended by Harvard Medical School of Public Health in its 1984 review. It had the full backing of the medical establishment. It was used from 1918 all the way up to 1975. And this 10 ml of blood which was injected into the patient was supplied by the top institutions in England and the United States. Johns Hopkins Hospital and the Horton Hospital in Epsom in England were supplying this dose of infected blood. This therapy was the malariotherapy, and this was developed by one Austrian doctor, Dr. Julius Wagner Yorik. Dr. Yorik lived between 1857 and 1940, and he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine in the year 1927. He had developed and perfected this treatment by 1917 or 1918. And his citation for the Nobel Prize reads thus: for his discovery of the therapeutic value of malaria inoculation in the treatment of dementia paralytica. Mind you, the word malaria inoculation is not a medicine against malaria. It is in fact that infected blood from a person infected with malaria. This was malariotherapy, and this was the mainstay. It saved many lives and made life much better for thousands of people. And as we saw earlier, this had the full support of Harvard Medical School and was used for more than 50 years, all the way up to 1975. Neurosyphilis was the condition which was being treated by Dr. Wagner Jorig. Neurosyphilis is when the brain is infected with syphilis and it cannot be treated. First of all, there was no available gold standard for diagnosis. And whatever tests were available for diagnosis had low sensitivity. So it was not easy to establish what was the real cause of the symptoms of paralysis which were being shown or which were being presented by the patient. Another problem was that the infective agent or the pathogen in the brain was difficult to culture, and it was a very fragile organism. At that period of time, they did have sulfur drugs and antibiotics, but they failed to work simply because these antibiotics had poor penetration of the brain-blood barrier. So the medicine could not reach the area where the infection was localized. And it was here that this malariotherapy was very effective. In fact, it was the only therapy that was available. And there were very few harmful effects of this therapy. This would be unthinkable in today's times. Of course, way back in 1927, when the Nobel Prize was awarded, there was no explanation as to why this is happening. There was no molecular or a biomolecular basis, no chemistry or physics to explain why it happens. It was only in later years, very recently, that the real mechanism was understood. The reason why all this worked was that research in the 1980s showed that malaria causes the immune system to increase production of immune substances. These immune substances are what we now know as interleukins and interferons. They are coded with some alphabets and numbers. And it is because of this that the therapy was effective. It was not that the malarial pathogens were attacking the pathogen which was creating neurosyphilis. It was another mechanism at work to which the doctors and scientists of that era were blind to. What happens in HIV is that the immune system is damaged and it becomes gradually ineffective and the person is open to tremendous number of infections. HIV infection weakens the immune system, and there is a particular type of immunity cell known as the CD4 cell which fails to respond to the virus. Moreover, despite the fact that we are giving drugs, the virus in the other parts of the body develops resistance to the drugs. And what is really required is not drug therapies targeting viral reproduction, but we need a therapy where the immune system is boosted and the immune system adapts to any mutation of the virus. This was exactly what was happening when malariotherapy was applied to patients with neurosyphilis. So the question that arises is that in case of HIV/AIDS, can we use the same therapy in order to boost the immune system by using malarial pathogens into the patient, and rather than targeting viral reproduction, we boost the immune system? This is a question that came to the minds of many researchers many years after this therapy was given up. This therapy was given up because antibiotics were developed which could arrest the spread of syphilis at a very early stage. People were also more aware and there was less stigma, social stigma attached to syphilis, and people were coming forth for treatment. As a result of which it never reached the stage where the infection would target the brain. So this idea was taken up by many scientists, and the United States CDC, or the Centers for Disease Control, they conducted a study in Congo. What they found was that in this study there were many symptomatic children with HIV. That means they were showing symptoms of AIDS. And there were some who were infected with malaria, and there was another group which was without malaria. What they found was that those with malaria, there were no deaths reported, none died. But those children who were not infected with malaria in the natural course, they were not using any malariotherapy, 33% of these children died. So this once again confirmed what Dr. Yorik found in practice, and the discoveries of the molecular biologists regarding the interleukins and the interferons and CD4 in particular seem to be working even for HIV and AIDS. Another study was conducted by Nebraska University along with the United States Navy Medical Corps. They did 3 independent studies in 3 countries: Venezuela, Indonesia, and Philippines. They were far apart geographically and also culturally distinct. What they found was that in malaria areas, people had the HIV infection because they were able to find HIV type antibodies, but there was no AIDS. There was no disease, even though the antibodies of HIV were present. Whereas AIDS, the disease, existed in all non-malarial regions. This was quite a startling discovery, and it prompted people or scientists and researchers to adapt malariotherapy for AIDS treatment or HIV/AIDS treatment. However, this was discouraged. No one knows why. The American Medical Association came up with some ethics objections, and along with these ethical objections was a strong lobby of pharmaceutical companies who saw no profits in this. After all, how much does it cost to collect the blood and send 10 ml samples around the world to control this? They had billions of dollars invested to find a magic pill. So such studies were not only discouraged, they were simply not allowed. Among the many people who were thinking about using malaria therapy or malariotherapy for HIV/AIDS was Dr. Henry Heimlich, who lived from 1920 to 2016, 96 years, just 4 short of 100. He is renowned for developing the Heimlich maneuver, which has saved many lives of people who were choking. It's a simple maneuver of holding the person from behind and pressing a closed fist held in the other arm just under the sternum. These abdominal thrusts stop choking, and they have saved 97% of the people who would have otherwise succumbed. Dr. Heimlich founded the Heimlich Institute in Cincinnati, Ohio, and he wanted to conduct this research, which was turned down by the ethics committee of the American Medical Association. So he conducted them in a few African countries, and one of the studies in Ethiopia is controversial because it is said that it did not have clearance from the government. However, he did find collaboration and cooperation from the Department of AIDS Control and Prevention in China and from the Municipal Health and Anti-Epidemic Station of Guangzhou in China. These 2 studies, of course, proved what Dr. Heimlich had always thought, that the interleukins and the interferons and the cytokines were able to boost the immunity. And this time the research was not just about how many people developed AIDS, it was more about the actual count of CD4 and other such critical parameters. What is interesting to note is that Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathy, way back in the 1830s, had actually said the same thing. What he said was that a new, stronger, dissimilar disease suspends the older disease. Most of us who are familiar with homeopathy know its principle of treating similar disease with drugs that create symptoms which are similar to the disease. This is the principle of similars. But in the same book, The Organon of the Medical Art, Hahnemann tells very clearly that a stronger disease will suspend the older disease. And he gives various examples in his book. Cowpox suspended scarlet fever. cowpox was very rampant because at that time there was a large rural population who used to run dairy farms from their homes. Mania suppressed tuberculosis. Smallpox suspended measles. And even measles suspended smallpox the other way around, because the newer dissimilar disease would suspend the older disease. Another interesting case was of ringworm suspending epileptic attacks. Mumps disappeared completely with cowpox inoculation. This is something like the malariotherapy which we just talked about. This inoculation was with live pathogens of cowpox, and mumps disappeared thereafter. This is really remarkable, and it's quite likely that Dr. Wagner Yorik had read his works, because all of Hahnemann's works were originally written in German, and it must have been part of German medical literature taught in colleges. That brings us to the end of this video, and we shall meet once again in the next video, where we shall be looking at directed prana or directed chi. In other words, activating prana and directing it specifically for cure, healing, and betterment of health. So thank you very much for your attention, and until we meet, bye bye.